I can see a lot of great ideas and very interesting aspects coming in, and I'm sure we'll record everything. And before I go to Dilara, maybe Monica, do you want to add something here, like from your point of view? What do you think when you read all those comments and those ideas? Is there missing something?
Well, I would say from my point of view, the question of whether we are doing enough is rather a scientific question, and the answer is no. So I don't know what magic actions those 7% who said yes know about that I don't know about, but the numbers don't add up. So obviously we're currently not doing enough, and Europe is not doing its part to remove the emissions, unfortunately. I can hope that we will get there once we start getting more concrete on the Green Deal. I think there are a lot of good ideas coming up quickly on the slide over here. I would encourage that people think about money. The EU is spending a lot of money on things that are more or less green, and actually still quite a lot of money is spent on things that go directly against climate action or that make it harder for people to make a green transition. So there is definitely some work to do on the European level to make sure that the financial framework actually supports that people can move in a greener direction.
Dilara, from your point of view, how would you react to all those ideas and also to what Monica just said?
I mean, there are a lot, and if I would react on every idea, it would take a while. But maybe in general, of course, we are not doing enough now, but we are having the Green Deal as a very good framework where a lot of the ideas you were putting up can be implemented if we have ambitious policy makers. So this is a little bit the challenge. So I see that a lot of aspects, and when I, for example, think of the question of the CO2 budget, we right now have the new climate law where we have for the first time a climate budget being set in this. So there is a legally binding framework where we have where the Commission is demanded to develop something like a CO2 budget. But of course, also you might have followed the discussion on the climate law. We are having some difficulties in finding a common ground in the European Union what ambitious and realistic goals are. So as a parliament, we demanded the climate law to have a 2030 target for at least 60%. But now we are seeing, of course, less with all the compromise being made, a target that is not enough. So I can see the frustration, and I also feel it because I also had it, that we don't do enough when it comes about the target. But I think the most urgent thing is that we are starting to act. And I think if we will start to implement all the different legislative proposals that are implemented in the Green Deal, the next round will be in mid of July, where there will be the so-called Fit for 55 package being presented with reforms of the emission trading schemes, for example, but also other important legislation. There is room to discuss and also to challenge policymakers to make the legislative framework from the Green Deal really fit for ambitious climate goals. So I think we shouldn't give up just because the goals are not high enough. We should start reducing emissions now. And I can promise you that in the European Parliament, there's at least a big majority that's working on that. But I bet we will go more in detail of some of the proposals you are making. So this would be my overall remark. So it is work in progress. We have to do more, and the Green Deal is a very good framework for that.
Thank you. We now talked a lot about deep dive politics already. As we also have some great young people here. I'm not sure if everybody's that well known with what's actually going on at the moment. Maybe Monica, you can, if you would have someone in front of you who has never ever heard before of the Green Deal and the EU climate law, what would you how would you explain that in maybe two or three sentences?
So I would say that I would say that the climate law is a commitment that the EU has made on its own behalf, so that it binds the Commission, but it will have real trouble actually getting the countries to do anything because it doesn't bind them. So it's better than nothing, but there's definitely work to do there for it to be actually what happens on the ground, since much of the emissions, is impacted by common legislation, of course, but is in the end mostly impacted by how the nations respond to the European legislation. About the Green Deal, I would say that it's a wonderful Christmas tree full of green things we want to do, but that we have no idea how many of them will happen yet. But we all are very hopeful, and the first draft had many good intentions in it, and we all have cheering for many of those.
As you said, it's a wonderful Christmas tree. It's a quite nice metaphor. Like what is your criticism? Why do you think it's a Christmas tree?
Well, because it's full of beautiful things that we want, but that have not been made concrete yet, and that we do not know if actually will be implemented. But that are good things, and that would be wonderful if many of them actually happen in real life.
Dilara, on that, like what do you say? Do you think also that the Green Deals and the goals which are inside there is achievable with the resources planned so far?
Well, we have about, I think, 80 concrete legislative proposals that are announced yet. And I don't work in the Commission, I'm in the European Parliament, but I can bet it's a lot of work to start also designing all the laws that are now put to place. So they are very comprehensive, from the question on how we can have an economy that is more sustainable by reusing resources and not only throwing them away. It's about biodiversity protection. It is about energy, of course, and a lot of things. So I see that it's not everything put on the table immediately when the Green Deal is announced. But I also see that what is the challenge is that we really have proposals that, first, of course, are not blocked by the Council, which is often a problem, but also being coherent in itself. So I have some criticism about that too, when I think, for example, of the Common Agriculture Policy, where we have the hugest budget in the European Union with 2/3 of the money we have together, which is not mainstream to the Green Deal yet. So we are using one important tool right now, not efficient enough, and this is a huge problem, because we know that we have restricted resources that we have as a European Union together, and of course the possibilities to define under European states how to use their money is limited. So what I think is a very important discussion we are having right now is on the so-called taxonomy for sustainable investments in the European Union, where we really want to have this. We want to have a common ground, what we define in the European Union as a sustainable investment. And I'm very clear about that shouldn't be fossil fuels, and it shouldn't be also, and this might be a little bit controversial in a multinational discussion round like this, also nuclear power, because we know that there is no sustainable use of it, and there's a lot of money that needs to be invested in that. And I think the future is in renewables, and I would really like to see that this would be the common ground, but this would be difficult. So we know that the challenges every member state is facing when it comes to the social ecological transition is very different, and it takes a lot of work to really make the Green Deal being the framework, the promise it is, being the first climate neutral continent, and also deliver on the responsibility we have as the richest region in the world, also on the footprint we already had. So the urgency to act ambitiously is big, and every measurement or proposal that is coming from the Commission, I will also measure by the commitments made by the Green Deal. So this is very important. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and we need more resources, and we need a common understanding on where we want to go.
A lot of work to do, indeed. Monica, like, where would you start if you were in Dilara's position? Or maybe in Dilara's position, but maybe also in the position of a commissioner.
Well, there are several things to do with money that I would probably start with. It was just mentioned that one of the largest budget posts we have in the EU, we then decided not to climate mainstream last time we changed it, which was I think, a major disappointment to most of the green NGOs and also the young people. Because if we're going to achieve a green transition, and then we take the largest chunk of our budget and don't touch it, then it's impossible, I'm sorry to say. So that needs reopening and looking into, and I know it's very difficult and complex, and there are many interests at stake, and people need feeding, and people need jobs and as well, but you cannot take a huge part of the budget and say this is off limits, or like this amount of investments into producing something can be given with no green strings attached at all, because then people will keep producing as they usually do, and then we will not, then there is no way to the goals. So there cannot be bits of our budget, especially not the large ones, that we just leave untouched by this.
Dilara, would you agree?
Yes, I was also referring to that. We know that the current proposal on the Common Future Agriculture Policy is kind of inherited by the last mandate. So the last commission was proposing it. So to be fair, they haven't had the Green Deal on the agenda. But anyhow, I heard that, and I will get a bigger update this afternoon from my colleague who's in the Agricultural Committee. There has been the negotiations, and there has been the urgency also from the side of the Parliament to have at least more ecological strings being attached to the future budget when it comes to the criteria, how farmers getting this money from the budget. So there right now, the negotiations in the so-called trilogue, where the Commission, the member states, and also the Parliament are negotiating it's right now blocked. So maybe this is a good point where, again, civil society should react and should be mobilized for pressure to be made in that negotiations, because I also see that agricultural policy is something that is not so much in the center of the debate, although it is very, very important when it comes to hit our climate targets, because we know that most of the biodiversity loss we are facing is because of the way how we use our resources, for example, land use. So it's important to act, and right now the negotiations are blocked, and we need to keep the pressure high. Yeah, so I completely agree.
Keep the pressure high is something like as someone from a youth organization myself is a very welcome saying. But I'm a little wondering, like, isn't it sometimes also more about not more, but let's talk about climate and energy policy, for example. As part of environmental policy is mixed competence of the European Union. So talking about competences and the member states. So mixed competence between European Union and the member states. Is that right? Or because what we often do say is that the European Union should, we as federalists often say that, some other people luckily as well, that the European Union should have the competences, especially in those big, very urgent policy fields that we need to tackle on a European or even on a global level. So again, to the shared competences, is that right, or should we change something here from an institutional point as well?
Should I start with that?
Yeah.
So I think in a lot, it makes sense to discuss it in a lot of aspects, but in general, especially when it comes about environmental policy, on the hard law, I would say we have a lot of competence on the European Union. Where we're having a problem is how the regulations we are having from a European side are implemented on the national level. We have a lot of member states who are not fulfilling existing EU environmental law that is already there. There are estimations that if we would implement all the regulation that is already there, we would have an emission reduction from 2030 from 48%. So we would be way more better already if we just implement the existing framework we are having. And talking about the Green Deal and all the framework that is going to be adapted, there's way more room, I'm convinced of that, to having a bigger reduction when it comes even on the short term to 2030. So I don't think the competence question is the question. It is the question of how member states fulfill the European framework yet, and also when it comes to the future action. Yeah, that would be my answer on that, because there is a lot of competence we are having on a European scale. Maybe not money-wise, there is something that we could discuss, that we have like the same amount in the budget after the UK left, for example. It was a hard fight. So there is not a lot of political will from the member states to give more money on the European level to distribute, which would be also important, because we know that the challenges of investing in the social ecological transitions are different when you compare, for example, Germany or Poland. There is a lot of more to do, for example, in Poland when it comes to investments in renewable energy. And I would say we should maybe have more common money we can spend on it to have a fair transition. But when I think about the regulation part and the competence part, we're having actually a lot possibilities on a European scale.
Thanks a lot. Just before I hand over to Monica again, quick advice again to our participants. You're very welcome to join us to ask everything you always wanted to ask. Just feel free to put your questions in Slido, or to directly also raise your hand and just join us here on the panel. I do see that there are some questions already in Slido. And I'd like to ask the second one what I see. Monica, how big is the influence of YouTube movements, but also like of young activists like Fridays for Future on a national and on a European level, I would say?
Well, maybe it's more the question for the politician in the room. I would say, from someone who works with these organizations, that there's quite a lot of power in that, and that I believe that some of the things the politicians are doing is because they're scared of these movements, and that it's shifting the window of the conversation in a way that is needed to achieve change, and that's why we keep doing it. But I'm curious to hear from the politician point of view. Is that also how you feel? Does it help you be pressured in a greener direction?
I think without Fridays for Future, there would haven't been something like the Green Deal we are seeing now. So I wasn't a politician before I entered the European Parliament, and I was actually also demonstrating with Fridays for Future a lot. And I think the whole agenda of Europe has been influenced by those movements. The question is how committed the majority of politicians now feels to also deliver when it is asked to fulfill the demands. Because this is what I think is very interesting about Fridays for Future. This is not a rebel movement. It's just a movement that reminds politicians about what they have promised to do by, for example, hitting the Paris Agreement and hitting the targets there. So it's not a very rebel youth movement that is demanding things that are completely nonsense or something like this. They just remind politicians to hit the targets they have agreed on an international scale. So I see, I for myself have a good contact with different youth activisms, but I also see how it's possible for members of the European Parliament to not listen to those movements. And this is what I also think I would take. Yes, I think the agenda has been completely influenced by the youth movements, but I really think also, and I think it's also a discussion that is right now in another session, that we also have to see how we can have meaningful and binding youth participation and youth voices being heard in the decision-making processes. Because saying that the movement is amazing and that the agenda they are fulfilling is good is not enough. You also have to have the influence on it. So yeah, it's both sides.
Very much agree here. But then we do have the pressure from civil society, which is quite high. And we do have also the competences on the European level, as you mentioned earlier, Dilara. But now I'm wondering if we really if the main problem might be really the member states. I'm wondering how the situation in Denmark is at the moment. Monica, maybe you can tell a little about how it's there. Like, is climate protection a concrete focus?
I mean, it is a focus, and here striking has really helped as well. There is a climate law now that is broadly supported by every party except 2, I think, which is a lot in a Danish context. We have like 8 different parties then inside of the deal. So there's a high commitment to having to reduce 70% by 2030. And we're in a political landscape now where politicians cannot really back out of that without losing serious amounts of face. So that's nice. And it's nice that this is also going to be the case if we have another government next time, because they're all bound by this. What is not so nice is that they're not actually taking the needed steps to reach this. So we're having all of this hockey stick debate where the government wants a shape of the curve towards climate neutrality that is shaped nothing, 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 and then we hurry. And all the young people are like, hurrying a lot later sounds really, really expensive, maybe technically impossible, and sounds like you're just making it our problem in the future. So we're trying to pressure them to flatten the curve some quicker. So that's the main fight at the moment, but it definitely is higher on the agenda than it has been before. And there is still a lot of striking and a lot of anger in the having made a law and then honestly not really following it, which is the current situation. And I think the pressure is going to keep up so much that they will have to do better than they're doing now.
Dilara, when it comes to EU member states, would you say that, like, from your point of view, that when it comes to the single member states, that the ones who really want more climate protection and really fight for that, are they enough to be a real driver to take the whole 7 countries with them, or where would you see the main obstacles here?
I mean the way how we make policies on the European scale is a little bit more complex than just having member states on board. We also need political majorities when it comes to that. So I have seen in the last 2 years that we in the European Parliament can make it to have something like what I like to call progressive majorities when it comes to climate action. We are having it's with the conservative Scandinavian MEPs, it's with the Liberals, with the Socialists and Democrats and the Greens and the Left, where we, for example, made sure that as a parliament we demanded emission reduction for 2030 for at least 60%. But then we saw when the council met and the different countries were putting up their position, there was no way to have a more influential or more ambitious goal, for example, for the 2030 question. We have member states that are blocking really having more ambitious goals. For example, the Visegrad states, which are very hesitant when it comes to set high goals. But you also have to see, and this is what I think is important about when you want to do politics on a European scale, you also have to see the reasons why. Of course, there are some politicians that don't believe in climate change actually being a thing and the climate crisis being something that is needed to be solved. But the roots of that is that people are afraid of the transition that is coming up. And I think what we need to do on a European scale is also showing that climate ambition really is also a way of how the European Union can guarantee the well-being of people on a long term, so that the challenge we are facing right now can be possibilities and chances we are having in the future. So I think it's a very complex question, and yes, it would help a lot if we would have some more progressive governments in Europe that also stop blocking in the council. But I think this can only be achieved if we achieve that people are not scared of the changes that might come with the transition.
We do have a question in Slido that I'd like to pose here. Maybe trying to connect it, because the question is, how can young Europeans work together for more climate protection, and how can you turn to with I don't know, who can you turn to with concrete ideas or complaints? And maybe let me add the transnational aspect here. Like, how can we transnationally work together for more climate action, and especially on the European level, turn to with concrete ideas or complaints. Yeah, maybe Dilara again.
I would have thought that this is an ideal question for the European Youth Forum. So maybe you first, Monica.
Yeah, well, the good news is that when you have 100 member organizations who are either youth councils inside of all the European countries, or who are umbrella organizations for specific types of youth organizations all over Europe, then probably in your local city, there's at least a handful of either members or members' members that you can turn to. And that might be your local scouts, or it might be your student council wherever you study. We have them from all different types of education on all the levels, so you can pick. There is, of course, specific green organizations that you can always turn to and who always have projects that you can get involved with. But there's also the opportunity to go inside your youth council and say, hey, I think we should be more active on this. How can I start a project? Because a cool thing that I'm observing is that all of our members are more and more doing this. It's not just, but it's not only anymore the green organizations who are fighting this. It's really everyone attacking it in their own angle. It's something that gives me a lot of energy in my daily life, that I see all our members with their very diverse ways of working, but that they all are acknowledging that, well, as young people, we have a joint interest that the world be not on fire for us. And then they find whatever way fits into their type of organization. For the student councils, it might be changing the curriculum. For the scouts, it might be going out and collecting batteries to ensure that they don't end up in our water. It might be a whole bunch of different things. So I'm sure there's something that suits for you, whatever type of person you are. Then there's a youth organization that fits for you.
What would interest? Oh yeah, no, did I go?
No, because I thought that you were saying like this because I think then I can really connect good to that. This is the first step, that youth organizes themselves and being loud when it comes about that. But then you have to take the next steps and also challenge politicians and address them, and also make them clear that they are also doing their job on your behalf. They are not only there for some lobby organizations or some older people. They are also your representatives, and this is why you have to, in the next step, also challenge and be vocal and address policymakers, because they are the ones who are having the responsibility to deliver on what you are demanding. So this would be the next step. And also what I think a lot about it, and I would like to hear your thoughts about it, how we can have a more strict, for example, involvement of young voices in the policy making process. For example, when I work in the environmental committee, we have a lot of hearings on different topics from the scientific point of view, from from businesses view, but hardly ever we have young voices being heard in those decision making processes. And I think this is crucial, and that we need to deliver also.
Monica, do you want to add here on the question, like also how to involve young people in the policy structure?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's good that you mentioned that you're hearing from all of these people, but maybe a little bit too little from the young people, and I think that's true. When you look at the landscape of what kind of lobbyists are around, young people are kind of outnumbered by people who want something slightly different than we do, because they just have more money and more lobby muscle behind them. We're working a bit on youth mainstreaming, talking about how you can ensure that if you are a decision maker and you have a committee that does something important, that you can think of the issue of youth into that and get more young voices to the table, so that this perspective isn't forgotten. It's a part of how we work on strengthening democracy and making democracy more fit for youth. Because what can also happen if we forget to do that is that young people sort of lose interest or lose hope in the institutions, and they are thinking that, oh, you have to be an old man in a suit to matter in that committee, so I'm not even going to email them because, it's far away, it's down there in Brussels, and they won't listen to me. So we're sort of working on bridging that and encouraging decision makers to build more channels of whatever type fit into their committee, so they can get some well-needed angry young people into the rooms sometimes.
Thanks a lot to both of you. We do have a lot of questions in Slido, but I want to put our focus on one here, which is, are nuclear power plants making the transition easier? And as we can't store the green energy yet, instead of relying more on fossil energy like in Germany. I'd love to hear your comments on that, because I think it's not a very easy topic. And I also love to hear comments from our participants, like on how you think on that topic. Whoever of you wants to start, just jump in.
I can.
I was just raising my hand.
Oh, that was then just maybe, yeah, why not? I don't know who just said that, but maybe you can just
Oh, I'm sorry.
start speaking.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, I was just wondering, you just said that all the young people should be involved in this process, that this is a very important issue, of course, but I think it's also very important to involve all the young people from all over the world, not just Europeans, as this is really a global crisis. So I was just asking you, how do you think we could ensure to involve really every country, like China or the US, who contribute a lot to the climate change, that they can work together with the EU, and maybe also considering all EU legislations, considering the climate crisis, so that the EU does not have to work alone, but with all its partners in the world?
I see Dilara wants to react, please.
I can do that. I mean, what I think is very crucial about the Green Deal, that it's not only a nice project we are doing as Europeans together and we then celebrate that we are the first climate neutral continent. And no, we also have to look at the responsibilities we have when it comes to environmental destruction, pollution, and in other places in the world. And this is why I think what is important, that the Green Deal is not some closed job we are doing as Europeans, but also committed also when it comes, for example, of the international scale, when we have climate diplomacy being fulfilled, where we are also trying to organize something like a race to the top when it comes about hitting climate target. But also I think legislation needs to react on the footprint we are leaving as Europeans on a global scale. And this was basically one of the first tasks I had in the parliament. I was suggesting a framework on how we can reduce our deforestation footprint as a European Union, where the partnership between the producing countries of so-called forest risk commodities, for example, if you think about soy, palm oil, a lot of those resources are used in the European Union, are traded by European companies, and there is a supply chain that is behind this. And what I think is that that as European Union, we have to also take up responsibility when it comes about environmental destruction we are doing outside the borders of Europe. And for example, with the supply chain law on deforestation commodities, but also in general, looking at our supply chains is a very crucial point. And with that, there is also always the perspective of civil societies, for example, in the producing countries, needs to be heard. And also, this is a very crucial point in the proposal I made for the European Commission. We will see if they come up with that and they will implement it. And there is the promise of Ursula von der Leyen that she will take every initiative that is coming from the European Parliament. But I think it's very important that we see also that our doing as Europeans has effects beyond our borders, and why this is why the Green Deal needs to be a global Green Deal in an ideal world. But at least we have to take responsibilities for what we are doing outside our borders.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right, let me postpone the question on the power plants for a second, because I saw somewhere another question which just now suits very well, which is about the intersectionality of the policy areas, also within the European Green Deal. I don't find the question right now, but it was an is it, first of all, is it realistic? So do we actually, is that just the idea at the moment behind everything which is happening? Like also, for example, in the multi-annual financial framework, we have all those aspects which say building back better. We want to connect the policy areas, but like, is intersectionality also wanted by the various politicians also on the national level? Whoever of you wants to react. I found the question. Sorry, just to be very correct. Do you think politicians are having an intersectional perspective? That was the initial question.
Well, maybe we share first, because I was talking so long for just now, Monica's view on it, and maybe then I can see how I see the situation in the Parliament.
Well, I would say that most of them don't at the moment, or at least it doesn't come through very clearly in their actions. So they will, with one hand, in one committee, be committing to high climate targets, but then with another hand, proposing to expand our airport and build more roads everywhere, which we know will lead to more people in cars and fewer people in the public transportation. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the different agendas that are being pushed by the same politicians. There's definitely a need of intersectionality there. There's also a bit of a need of intersectionality when it comes to the impacts of climate change on various large challenges. Everyone is talking about the economy and being fiscally conservative and how important it is not to overspend, but it is quite well documented by now that the delaying the climate action is going to be so much more expensive afterwards, and not like in 100 years, but in 20 or 30 years while I'm still a taxpayer. So it's like you're thinking about the economy, but you're not, though, at least if we're not looking at the economy as a whole over 30 years, because there's a huge overspending there related to the inaction on climate change. So there's definitely some thinking in separate boxes about issues and not thinking about how they interlink with each other. Another great example is the lack of connection between thinking about healthcare and thinking about the environment and the spending that goes into those two things. Because if we were willing to invest in getting rid of all the coal, we could save more money in healthcare because of not getting all of that lung cancer and other lung diseases. That would save more money than it costs to get rid of the coal. So if those two boxes of money were connected, we would have done it already, but they are not. They belong different places in the budget. So we don't want to spend the future saved healthcare money on getting rid of the coal because it's another box in another ministry, so it's not happening. So there's a bit of a challenge there.
Yes, I completely agree. There's not enough people caring about an intersectional perspective, but I also can tell you that there's a lot of movement in the European Parliament when it comes about that, because we really try to build cross-committee, cross-group lines action between different MEPs, because we see that that all the things we are pushing for in the Green Deal, they are interlinked to other questions. When I, for example, make a proposal on how we reduce our deforestation footprint, of course, this also has to do with trade policies. This has to do with development questions, having perspectives for people who live, for example, by on producing forest risk commodities. So it's interlinked, and this is why I think the Green Deal needs to be a task of all committees, of all members of the European Parliament, and not just those in the Environmental Committee. And also, I combine the question of intersectionality always also with the feminist question. So I'm a big advocate for a feminist climate policy, because we see right now that climate change, the climate crisis, is hitting women the most, and they are also hit most when we don't act. So the consequences of not action is way more big for women, especially in the society, but also other vulnerable groups. And we just also have a lot of debates on that in the European Parliament. And I think this really needs to be a framework. We are discussing a lot about the industries that need to be changed when it comes to climate change, and it's an important discussion because we know that this is something where the wealth of Europe is also, of course, very crucial. But we also have to see that if we only care about the transition of the industry, which I don't think is something that we shouldn't care about, but we have to see if we just focus all our energy on that, there again might be women be left behind, because the most of the people who are working in the classic European industries, they are men. So we also need to see that the transition is not only changing the status quo into a greener one, but we also have to see that injustices that are existing in Europe are also tackled by this. So I always like to say that we need the Green Deal that has a hard green, outside, like a watermelon, and also having a red side that is tasteful and makes the transition bearable and full of chances for everyone. And this is also what I like to say about which is actually happening, but we need to make it more present. Hannes Kuhn, for example, was talking about the Lausitz region that is very hit by the transition, and we need to organize a European solidarity with that. We know that some regions are hit more hard, and then we have to see how the consequence being solved in that. And we have something that is called the Just Transition Fund, which is exactly there for that the regions who have bigger challenges need to have political support. Unfortunately, the money is not as big. The Just Transition Fund is not as big as we wanted it to be, but it's a start that we see that there are different regions, different groups having more challenges with that. But I agree, this needs to be a more coherent line in the decision-making process.
Thank you, Dilara, also for directly answering Hannah's question. That makes my role much more easier. I do see we have people who just raised their hands on that very in that very moment. That are, for example, Claire. Claire, do you want to pose your question?
Hi, my name is Claire. I'm from Germany, from the Baltic Sea, and I'm 17 years old. And in relation with projects for the environment and competitions, starting by schools where they can work together, I would have the idea that countries from Europe with people who are in schools. So we could start a school project where people who would like to do this would come in a project where they could plant trees, for example, in other countries, or just collect the rubbish in I don't know what it is in English, I'm so sorry.
No, you can always say it in German as well. And then
okay.
we translate or...
Okay, also ich hatte auf jeden Fall die Idee, Projekte zu starten, wo Schüler aus ganz Europa Projekte starten könnten für wohltätige Zwecke, so zum Beispiel in Form von Wettbewerben, sodass auch Schulen Preise dafür bekommen könnten und dass sowas sich auch gut in einem Lebenslauf machen würde. Man könnte dann an zum Beispiel Stränden, wo wirklich unheimlich viel Müll rumliegt, könnte man das Ganze dann sammeln, damit die Leute aus Europa, wo es ja eigentlich relativ sauber ist, mal einen Eindruck davon bekommen, was Umwelt eigentlich bedeutet.
Mhm.
Also was bedeutet es, umweltfreundlich zu leben und was verursacht das alles? Und dass man einfach einen Grund sieht, mehr auf die Umwelt zu achten, dass man sieht, was das alles so für Folgen hat und dass man einfach etwas dafür tut und ein sehr viel besseres Verständnis dafür bekommt.
Mhm. Thanks a lot. Danke dir, Claire. Just to quickly translate it to the other people, Claire proposed the idea with the idea to teach people what it actually means to live sustainable or not, to have projects starting in schools, transnational projects where people come together and do some joint actions on climate protection, on sustainability, maybe even connected to some kind of competition. On that idea, what do you say? It's a very nice idea, I think, but I don't like that's my opinion. What maybe Monica, what's your how would you react on can we do something like that? Or do we already have something like that maybe?
Well, yes, we have, for example, some members of the Erasmus Student Networks who are arranging events like this and who are internationally in touch with each other about the outcomes of it. And I think it's nice when young people take these type of initiatives, but what we also need is support for that, because even though young people are, I mean, our free time is very free. We are not the most expensive labor in the world. It still is not possible for us to make all these types of cool initiatives with no funding at all. So there, it's also a question of from the politicians to make sure that there is just small amounts of funding, because it's really not very expensive, but it does take just a little bit of support to get something nice organized. And that's also why we've been working for example, more Erasmus money targeted at young people wanting to take grassroots initiatives. And also for it to be more accessible for young people who are trying to work from the ground up on something, and not just for sort of professional bureaus of actually not young people, but people working for young people. So we're trying to work a little bit on that, and also making the European money set aside for young people actually go to young people afterwards, because there can be some challenges in that. But definitely, I mean, go organize that, and if applying for European money for it might feel heavy, then try pressuring some of your local businesses to give you a little bit of a hand with fundraising for it. And good luck. I hope you get it started.
Thank you.
Maybe just a quick comment from an organizational point of view. Posing questions in English is quite hard sometimes. So you're very welcome to pose the question in your mother tongue, unless we know it. That's a bit like the difficulty. So German would be totally okay for the Lara and me. And you can also pose it in Danish, I guess. And then Monica, I hope will translate it to us. Just don't feel free to pose your questions. Also, the debate here is currently in English, and we will translate it happily. I do see we have more people raising her hands, but maybe, Dilara, did you want to react on that idea as well, or should we proceed? Is that okay for you?
Just maybe one short thing, because I have the privilege that I really also use my duties as a European Parliament member to go a lot around in school classes and also listen to the projects. And I know they are already there, and there are a lot of concrete proposals on how to tackle the climate crisis on a local ground. And of course, I also know that always the European Union only can deliver on the framework, and we need to know that the concrete action needs to be also taken locally. So I think the question on funding is a very crucial one. And just to mention one kind of what we are having right now is the so-called climate pact, where I when I read correctly, Monica is also a, how is it called, ambassador, which also puts this idea to have funding and to have knowledge about the possibilities of where you can apply, for example, to be funded with your projects on a more local level. So I think this is important, the knowledge about it, because there are a lot of opportunities to be funded on a European scale, but it's just very complex sometimes to get through the jungle. So this would be maybe another point.
Thank you. Then I would hand over to Anna Herberholz, who also raised her hand.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm 16 years old and I'm from the organization Bund Jugend NRW. And that was my question about intersectionality, because I myself, I'm a BIPOC person, and I think I see in the climate movement a lack of people of color, of women, and I think I also see that in the European Parliament. And I think, are there any regulations, are there any protocols? Because I think maybe experts or organizations who also preach about things like climate justice means also social justice. And do you have any ideas or answers to that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that question is very interesting to both of you. So first, Dilara, for your to the last point, and then also the broader perspective from Monica would be very interesting here.
Yes, I think it's a very good one actually. Especially in my group, this is a very crucial one, because of course we care a lot about the social effects climate policies have, and that we know that when we talk, for example, only about the pricing, carbon pricing, and how to make things more expensive to meet the real cost they are having for environment and nature, we also have to talk about the how we can solve the social consequences. And I think it's also a question of representation in that point. So myself and my S&D colleague Mohammed Shahim, we are the only MEPs with a migration background in the environmental committee. So this is again a question of perspective on that. So I also see that the climate movement in general is a very white movement, and I also of course ask my question why this is the case. And also we know that maybe it's not a question of having a migration background or not, but when I see also, for example, in the east of Europe, where we have less high standard of living, for example, where the incomes are way lower, we don't see as many climate movements as, for example, in the west of Europe. We, for example, also don't see so much green parties in Eastern Europe and compared to the west. So this is, of course, a question on which is inherent in the climate crisis, that there are some people who have the privilege to think about it and to think about consequences, and maybe also think about the consequences this might have on their own lives, and by, for example, the consumption choices they are making, the jobs they are taking, etc. While others don't have this privilege to choose where to buy their groceries, where to buy their energy, how to pay for their energy bills, because they always have to take the cheapest option. And this is why I think having the social dimension of the green transition in the core is a very crucial one. And I also agree that there's it's not enough seen yet, and also because we know that the concrete measures on how to make the negotiation on that and to how to navigate it is sometimes on the competence on the national level. So, for example, if we would have a new emission trading system where we have put every dimension or every sector in one pot, and then say the carbon prices need to rise, we don't have the tools on a European scale to solve the social gap that might be huge on that. And this is why I, for example, always put in this debate that we need to talk about the social consequences when it comes to that. So this really needs to be put in every decision we are making. And I sometimes think that this is forgotten by some parts of the parliament. But I can just assure you that I really work on that a lot, and I think it's crucial. That's what I made clear when I talked about intersectionality.
Thank you. Please, Monica, you feel free to add.
Yeah, well, I can almost only echo these points about intersectionality, and climate change is an interesting issue because on all accounts that you can be less privileged in society, climate change is gonna make it worse for you. And that's just unfairness piled on top of unfairness, honestly. And when we are in that situation, that, for example, being a woman or being a migrant or having even LGBTQ status in some nations in the world is going to be not a great situation to be in when it comes to dealing with the consequences of climate change. And it's a huge paradox that while this is the case, and while being less affluent or coming from a global south country or all of these things, while they mean that you get more of the crap that comes from climate change, these things also usually mean that you get less power over how we stop it. So that's just, unfair from two sides. And it also means that we have to work with that unfairness from two sides. So first of all, making sure there's better representation when it comes to fighting climate change, and that the voices of those who are most hit are going to be brought more into the rooms. And then second of all, finding solutions that are socially just, as was mentioned. Interestingly, one of the best things you can do against climate change is actually empowering women. I think that's kind of interesting that even if we only cared about reducing emissions, giving women access to reproductive rights and education, wow, it's annoying with these pop-ups. But giving women access to that is, even from a climate mitigation perspective, one of the things that we need to do, even if we weren't thinking about the human rights of the women, which of course is even more important. So, I mean, the bad news is that we have unfairness from two angles, but the good news is that the solutions are actually also the ones that empower the groups that are disadvantaged. Just like if we do green transition right, then we also get jobs for those who are most in lack of jobs right now, because we will get a whole bunch of new jobs out of the green transition if we dare to invest in it. So two levels of unfairness, but also luckily, hopefully, two levels of solutions if we care to pay for them. That's the question.
Here. I have a very connected question here that just came in. If you could elaborate a little on how women are affected by climate change. Maybe that would be interesting here to remain a little on the topic.
Well, I have a whole presentation on that for another day.
We don't have time for that, unfortunately.
I know.
Maybe you can
So one of the things is that girls will get less access to education because of climate change, because who has to walk further for water when the droughts are coming? Unfortunately, mostly girls. So girls' access to education is a major climate solution, but the impacts of climate change is going to take away a whole bunch of girls' rights to education. Then there's the poverty that will come from it, the lack of food and water and useful land. Also more impacts women, unfortunately, due to the roles they take in the world. And to make matters worse, actually, climate-related disasters are going to cause more gender-based violence. I got kind of pissed off when I read that. I figured, is there no end to the amount of ways that climate change is making the world worse? But no, apparently we have to throw extra gender-based violence into the equation as well. There's a great website under the UNFCCC with some links to reports on just how much worse climate change is for women. I can recommend reading it, but also I can recommend doing it on a day where you have time to be really a sad and angry feminist afterwards, because that's at least how I felt.
Thanks a lot. I will have some final two questions because we are almost at the end of our time, very unfortunately. The one is because you just mentioned poverty, that climate change is going to increase also poverty. Here's a question. How can you make sure, oh no, it just vanished. Oh, here it is. How can you make sure that people who have a low income are scared off because the suggestions only consist of, for example, more taxes? That is probably a question that goes to Dilara. What will you answer here?
That we have to talk about other tools than just taxes to solve everything, especially from a European perspective, because we don't have a lot of say when it comes about taxation. No, I think what we have to make clear is that our economy, our society will change if we want to hit the Paris Agreement, if we want to make our societies resilient. But the question is, do we only make the same mistakes as before and not caring about the social consequences about it, or do we make this transition to be a chance for everyone who lives especially in a vulnerable place right now? And I think there is a lot of possibilities, because the costs of, or the consequences of inaction would be even harder. Then jobs would fall away without any compensation or any possibility of, for example, educate yourself and also be develop new skills that might give you a job on another scale. So I think what we have to do is to make this transition just by taking also the needs of the people who live, for example, in rural areas, who don't have an alternative to then the car right now. We have to make sure that everyone has the chance of having mobility and be able to pay for their energy bills when we have this transition going on. And if we only talk about making things more expensive and making it as a job of the consumer and not those ones who provide services, for example, the big companies who really have made a lot of money and produced a lot of injustices, but while having deals with fossil fuels and got kind of rich with those industries. I think this is where we need to start. We need to make it a responsibility to have sustainability criteria in your supply chains, in your production processes, and being more sustainable when it comes to that. And it's not only about the consumer paying the bills on that, it's about our economies changing to deliver on a sustainable future. So this is what I think is always easy to say, because I think a lot of big industries try to make fear in the consumers that everything will be more expensive and they won't have a car to drive around anymore. But it's about us as politicians to deliver on, for example, sustainable mobility and equal chances to, for example, high quality, sustainable food, and etc. It's our job to make the room for that, and that it's not anymore a competition advantage to be unsustainable and to use a lot of fossil fuels, but that it's a advantage to be more sustainable and resilient. So this is, I think, crucial, that we don't make it an individual problem, we make it a society problem that we need to find solutions for. And it's not about the ones to decide with the consumption decision how this will affect you. So it's about investment in sustainable economies and resilient societies, and this is something where you would have also demand to challenge the status quo when it comes about who earns more, who pays their taxes. It's connected to other fields. So this might be one answer to this, but this is complex and this is a big challenge. And I don't think that people should be made scared of the changes that are coming, but they have to see the chances, and this is what we need to be clear on.
Thanks to both of you. Final questions, as I said, also because it's not a different topic, but a different type of question. The one I wanted to pose before, but I'm very happy that we're sticking a bit to the other topic, because I think it was very, very important. But and please answer very short, although I know that you probably could answer with the whole presentation, both of you as well. Power plants, nuclear power plants, good tool to make transition easier, yes or no? I'll give each of you one sentence. 2 at the max. Who wants to start?
Monica, I just talked, so I would always like to balance it out.
Well, the FJ doesn't have a position on nuclear power, but I can mention that solar and wind are hella cheap, so go build that.
Thank you.
I think it's about priorities, and we know that the investments that need to be made, for example, in nuclear power to make it sustainable and to make it also working on a broad scale is way more bigger than investing in solar and other technologies. So I would think the priority should be not to go on fossil and nuclear transition bridges, just to invest right now in the right thing, which is the renewables.
All right, thanks to both of you. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our youth dialogue today, but certainly not at the end of that discussion, because what we really saw is that climate change and the whole issue is super complex and addresses very different people and levels and policy measures, and it's a life task to deal with that. First of all, I'm sure that if you have more questions or want to have more input, you can follow both our panelists. They're quite active online, so feel free to go and follow them and join some more discussions there. I would now hand over to Christine, who, as I said before, did the graphic live recording of that, and therefore try to kind of sum up that very nice and complex discussion here. So Christina, if you're ready, just feel free to jump in and to show us what you've done in the last hour.
Yes, hello from my side. I still fight with the technique. Give me 1 second and I'm there. Here we go. I hope you will see it in a second. I will just share my screen. And maybe Clara, give me a sign if you can see it. It's a bit slow today.
No worries.
But it is a graphic recording. If you never heard about a graphic recording, it's like a visual picture of the last 1.5 hours. Can you see it? I'm still confused about the technique. It says it's share. Well,
now we see it.
Yes. Okay, I leave it like it is. I guess you can see it. It starts, of course, with you, Clara, Monica, and Ilaria. And I guess you can just follow the green line and you can find all the spots we were talked about it. And of course, as you just said, Clara, the perspective of sustainable future of Europe is not easy, and it's not, I don't know, it's probably so complex that you cannot show it at one picture, but I hope all these little visuals can help you to see that it's deep, but it's a really big chance for all of us to make our future more sustainable. And I'm not sure if I have time, but if you follow the green line, you can, I guess it's easy to read. You see the wonderful Christmas tree, as Monica was mentioned, or like the watermelon. I mean, all these visuals, you heard about it, but I hope you can also see that we have to think outside the box, that we have to combine all our competences and the power for women, for intersectionality, for social diversity, for everybody to make the sustainable future. And with that, I guess it's enough to say for now. And I'm happy to share that picture, and I hope this is a good reminder for all of us to start now. You can see maybe the little footprints in the middle of the picture, and this means like our circle of influence. We should focus on our circle of influence. Of course, we have to have support as we have from Ilaria and Monica and Clara from you for the last 1.5 hours, but let's try to find our circle of influence and do our best to change the world to a better world.
Thank you, Christina. You not only provided us with a fantastic graphic recording. I'm always totally impressed by what you do in those 1.5 hours, but also with the wonderful last words, I think. So we will see, hopefully now it works, the 2 videos, one from, as announced before, like one from Michael Roth, Minister of State of Europe at the Federal Foreign Office in Germany, and the second one from Christian Clausen, Minister of Justice, European Affairs and Consumer Protection of Schleswig-Holstein. But let me quickly thank everybody who's been here today, and especially our two guests, Dilara and Monica, for being here, for answering every questions that we were answering you. It was super nice talking to you. Hopefully we'll do that again very, very soon. And until then, stay safe and enjoy the two videos. Thank you.
Dear participants of the German Scandinavian Youth Forum, dear fellow Europeans, hi folks. I'm happy to see so many of you willing to engage across borders for a sustainable future of Europe. The Conference on the Future of Europe is the opportunity for all of you to participate in a Europe-wide dialogue about how our European Union should develop in the next 10 to 15 years. Your concrete ideas and visions are needed on climate change and the environment and on any other issue that matters to you. The current crisis, the pandemic as well as the threat posed by climate change, mean we have to develop a common vision. The European Union has started to do so. With its European Green Deal, Brussels aims to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent in the world by 2050. Germany is likewise ambitious, and just a month ago, the German Federal Constitutional Court ruled the 2019 Climate Protection Act partially unconstitutional, demanding a more equal burden sharing between us and future generations, including you. This is what we did by raising our climate targets for 2030, 2040, and 2045 significantly. But tackling the climate crisis still remains an intergenerational challenge that has already activated youth leadership all around the world, starting right here in the north of Europe. Young leaders are holding older politicians to account, and rightly so. It's now time for you to make this endeavor a success. We depend on your creativity, on your fresh minds, and on your innovative thoughts on how to get Europe climate neutral by 2050. As a committed European, I'm hoping for similar engagement when it comes to other aspects of Europe. For it's not just about climate, but about the broader picture. Together with our fellow Europeans, we have a chance to ensure not only a climate neutral, but a more sustainable future of Europe. Your future, your Europe, is closely linked with sustainability, and only sustainable actions ensure all freedoms and opportunities that you might want to enjoy in the time to come. The Conference on the Future of Europe can help us in this effort, and I'm confident that today's event will produce an important input to the conference. Thank you so much for your commitment and for your contribution.
Dialogue. The future is in your hands. Make your voice heard. This is the motto of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which was launched on the 9th of May in Strasbourg. All citizens of the European Union are invited to come up with their proposals and visions for the future of Europe. You and all young Europeans are meant to play a major role in this conference. This role is stated clearly in the joint declaration of the European Parliament, the Council and the European Commission which sets out the objectives and the structure of the conference. Moreover, during the inaugural event on the 9th of May, European Union leaders stressed the importance of your generation when it comes to shaping the future of the European project. We owe the conference to your young generation. These are the words French President Emmanuel Macron used in view of the particular impact the COVID-19 crisis has on young Europeans. And furthermore, in her speech in Strasbourg, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, brought up the issue of intergenerational fairness, also with regard to the pandemic, but equally referring to the challenge of the climate change. By discussing ecological sustainability in today's youth dialogue, you are going to comply with one of the conference topics. Indeed, we are standing at the crossroads with regard to climate protection as well as to digitalization. We need fast progress in these key areas. Otherwise, we will not succeed in making Europe fit for the future. On EU level, some milestones have already been reached in the field of climate protection. The first important step was the agreement of the EU leaders in the European Council in December 2019 to transform the European Union into the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. It had not been an easy way due to serious concerns raised by some member states. But we have to move forward on EU level. This is why our focus lies on the coming into force of the European climate law. The new rules will impose a legal obligation on the member states. They have to achieve a climate-neutral European Union until 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% until 2030. I am confident that the European climate law will enter into force by July. Dear participants, in his speech in Strasbourg on the 9th of May, the current President of the Council of the European Union, Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa, drew a new narrative for the European idea. Instead of the peace project story, which fails increasingly to inspire, the green and digital transformation could be the new shared purpose of Europe. I'm looking forward to the discussion on Prime Minister Costa's vision in the conference and what the outcome will be. With today's youth dialogue, you already contributed to this debate. I would appreciate it if you took further part in the conference and kept your voice heard. Before closing, I would like to draw your attention to the slam poetry on the future of Europe, another event that we organized with regard to the conference and as a cultural contribution to the Fehmarnbelt Days program. Björn Höxtal, Peter Dyerbog, and Selina Seemann, three poetry slammers from Germany and Denmark, present their texts online during the whole day. Finally, I wish you an interesting discussion. Enjoy it.